Welcome to Roots of Representation, a podcast series brought to you by Knology, a leading organization creating practical social science for a better world. The podcast series is a part of our larger National Science Foundation-funded project called Black Rep for Kids, where we delve into the power of storytelling in helping young Black children prepare for and tackle the challenges of climate change. If you're interested in learning about how we can build a brighter climate future for Black children, their families, and their communities, you've come to the right place. Let's get started with Roots of Representation, the podcast centering Black climate story worlds for young minds. Hi, I'm your host, Ed Greene, and I'm thrilled to take this journey with you as we collectively discover ways to increase and improve the representation of Black voices, characters, and stories in children's climate change media. Our guest for this episode is Anthony Frasier, a former NPR producer with a decade of tech industry experience. Anthony's the CEO and founder of ABF Creative, a Webby award-winning audio production powerhouse celebrated for vibrant, multicultural, family-centered storytelling, situated at the intersection of cultural depth and emotional resonance. Although they are an award-winning podcast network and production company, Anthony says that they really consider themselves as relationship experts. They help brands turn customers into communities through the power of storytelling. Their partners include Audible, Wondery, Ben & Jerry's, to name a few. Some of ABF's productions include Into the Mix, a Ben & Jerry's podcast about joy and justice. Another is Adventures of Cairo, made with Wondery, and African Folk Tales with Miss JoJo, along with a mindfulness resource they call Charm Words. They've created daily affirmations for children of diverse backgrounds. So under Anthony's leadership and his team, ABF Creative has worked to diversify the tech landscape and to champion the empowerment of underserved communities. In addition to collaborating on the Roots of Representation podcast with us, Anthony is a member of the Black Rep for Kids Advisory Board. His newest podcast series, currently in development, is called What Happened to the Fireflies? And it deals with the harmful impacts of climate change, the concept of ecological balance, and the ways kids can be inspired to take action to protect the planet. Anthony is a generous thought partner, mentor, and incredible colleague. Anthony Frasier, welcome to Roots of Representation.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Pleasure to be in front of the mic and instead of behind it.
Well, we're glad to have you in front of it today. And we've invited you to share your expertise around the creation of Black-centered stories and media for children and youth. So we're going to explore some of your experiences making podcasts and other forms of audio content that include many that speak to the needs, interests, and aspirations of Black audiences. But beyond that, we'll briefly talk about what your work at ABF Creative is telling us in terms of the role that audio content can play in children's lives, and how we might take what you've learned and apply it to the creation of climate-focused story worlds for Black kids. But to start things off, could you tell us a bit about your work in the podcast production business, how you came to it, and what inspires you in terms of your work at ABF Creative?
Yeah, so thank you. It's an honor to be here again. I started out in the tech industry, and so I was what they like to call an ecosystem builder. And what an ecosystem builder is, it's really just someone who maybe not necessarily coding and and doing like technical work, but they're in the community. They're throwing events, they're hosting meetups, they're bringing people together to help push an industry forward. And I'm based in Newark, New Jersey, and Newark is a city that just didn't have a tech community. And so what I was doing was hosting a lot of events, inviting a lot of special tech speakers to the city, meetups, things like that. Just really just building the ecosystem on the ground for a tech community to be based in Newark. That job let me, and it's an unpaid job, by the way, and that work led me to landing an entrepreneur in residence position at Newark Venture Partners. So Newark uh, got his first venture capital firm, and it was in the same building as Audible, because Audible's CEO at the time, Don Katz, was the guy who got the venture capital fund started. And so me being the ecosystem builder in Newark, I felt like you can't have a venture capital fund in Newark and I not be involved in some way, shape, or form. And so I kind of like, strategically tried to find a way in, and lo and behold, one of the guys who were one of the VCs at the fund was already familiar with me and already familiar with the work that I was doing in the tech community for the last 10 years before that. And so he already knew I was hosting events in New York City and all these different things. And he said, "Oh man, we need that energy here." And so he kind of vouched for me to his partners and said, "We got to get Anthony involved." And that's when I kind of named my position, in a sense, where I came to them and said, "Hey, I would love to be an entrepreneur in residence at your venture capital fund." And I only knew that was a position I wanted to do because I saw someone else who was an inspiration to me, named Tristan Walker, who's another Black tech entrepreneur who's built a company called Bevel, that makes shaving creams and all these different things. He kind of went off into another field from tech, but I saw him before doing that, he took an entrepreneur in residence position at Andreessen Horowitz, which is a really well-known venture capital fund. So I said, I'm going to follow his path, and I'm going to ask Newark Venture Partners to allow me to be the entrepreneur in residence here. And so what that meant is an entrepreneur in residence position, for those who never heard of it, or what it means at a venture capital fund. It means that they give you the space and the resources to figure out what the next thing is that you're going to do, and they're supposed to fund it. They're supposed to support it. And so I was there for about 3 years trying to figure out what the next thing I was going to do. And it was unpaid. A lot of people don't know I didn't take any payment while I was doing that. And I didn't need to, because I was kind of doing other things, doing odd jobs, learning how to, doing some coding stuff for friends, and just doing little things to support myself. So I didn't need to ask for any immediate payment from them. And that's an advantage that I had over other people, that I just had other ways to monetize my life. And I could, while still being, full-time going to this entrepreneur in residence endeavor. Being in the same building as Audible, I saw that they were doing something called features or something like that, or premieres, and they were pretty much podcasts, but they weren't calling them podcasts, and they just wanted to let people know that we're doing something a little bit more higher quality. And so I found that there was a void that needed to be filled, because there weren't too many stories with with black writers, or black voices and black perspectives, and just diverse in general. I felt that there was a void that was completely missing. And so I eventually said, okay, well, I'm going to start a company that can help fill that void. And at first, New Adventure Partners looked at me like I was crazy. They were like, "Hey, you're supposed to be here building a high growth tech idea." And in their minds, that just wasn't high growth and high. There wasn't just a big ceiling for the work that I was doing, which is in venture capital. Just, they're looking at ceilings that are at $1 billion industries and billion, so me, creating this kind of company, for them, they didn't see a ceiling that went as high as that. And I was just validating that, hey, there is a big exit that could come from something like this, just look at all these other companies that have raised money. So there were other industries, other podcast companies that have raised venture capital dollars. So I was kind of validated by pointing at those guys. So eventually they came around and they allowed me into their accelerator, which I was able to get some early funding and get started. And so that's the short story, I guess, on how I kind of like got into audio production, just being inspired by what was going on upstairs from the venture capital office. And I grew up wanting to be a storyteller and always fascinated with film and cartoons and television. So I just like, hey, here's my way to get into that industry, leveraging all of the tech stuff that I've done over the years.
Well, I think that this is really important for people to hear, because in order to have multiple opportunities and ways to represent who communities are and what kinds of things communities are interested in, we have to have individuals like yourself who understand that need, as well as have the background and skills to really move on it. And I was happy to sort of be in that position of working in the children's media industry at the time that some other things were starting. Companies. And one of the wonderful things was, I think it was back in 2018, somebody said, "You need to meet Anthony Frasier." And I thought, yes, I do. And this is really another way in which I'm so happy that you've been a part of our work at Black Rep for Kids. I also want to make sure that I get a chance to have you talk a little bit about the ways in which your work is grounded in data and information. But at ABF Creative, you conducted a survey called Sounds of Self-Esteem, which looked at how audio content is impacting mental health and emotional well-being of kids between the ages of 4 and 11. What did you find out, and what sort of was your impetus for actually doing that? Because I was just really, really so glad to see that study.
Yeah, so ABF kind of went through a pivot. I want to rewind a little bit, because at first, a lot of our focus was on multicultural, diverse podcasts and, Black and brown stories, which were very much still very committed to that. But it wasn't, it was too wide, in a sense where we didn't discover that until we did during COVID. We actually did a podcast called African Folktales, which you mentioned. And African Folktales at the time started to become our most downloaded podcast. And we were just kind of like, why is this resonating? But all the other work we're doing not resonating. Like everything else is just kind of like, you get one download here and 2 downloads a day here. And things was looking real scary, I'll be honest. And this is work we were pouring our heart and soul into. But just during COVID, we just happened to say, well, let's do something for the kids so they're stuck in the house. And African Folktales was born. And that's when I started to understand, like, wow, this is an even bigger void. Like, Black and brown children do not have an outlet. They don't have something they can listen to. They don't have, audio that's directly towards them. All the other kids' audio at the time was very general, or or had a white face on the cover, or had voices that sounded so far from the people that were in their classrooms, that were that were their teachers or that were their friends. So I just said, okay, why don't we just start making audio for kids that sounds a little bit more like the world they come from? That sounds like the teachers that's in their classrooms, that sounds like their mothers, that sounds like their best friends. And maybe we'll start to create more content that resonates. And that's when we started to just really just say, okay, we're switching the focus from just being this company dedicated to this widespread diversity or Black content to just focusing on diverse family content and with kids. And the great thing about targeting kids is kids don't see color. And so while we came out and we started saying, well, we're making charm words, and charm words is for Black children to help the Black children close the grade gap with their white counterparts. That was the original intent for charm words. But white kids listen too. Asian kids listen too. And, and so many kids from so many backgrounds. Kids don't see color. The way we do. Kids don't see race the way we do. And so by focusing on being a multicultural kids and family company, that made us mainstream by default, because kids don't recognize content as Black content. They don't recognize that. They just hear something and they like it. And if they like it, they listen. And so that's how we transitioned to just being so focused on kids and family. And so part of that was like, how we need to understand even more about our audience. We need to understand even more about why kids are listening to audio and kids are listening to PI, and why parents are directing the kids to listen to audio more. And so that's what kind of inspired us to do a survey, to just learn, to selfishly learn more, but also contribute to the industry in some way. There's only been like one survey that comes out, and I think it was from Edison Research, and it's very useful. But there was nothing else. So we wanted to create something that can help inform us on how to make better content, but also help to contribute to the industry. And what we learned from the experience is just like how to make better content, to be honest. Like we see that music is a big part of these podcast experiences. We see that self-esteem gets boosted from audio only content, which is what we set out to improve, to prove. We saw that there was a lot of validation in making mindfulness content, and there's a void still. There can't be enough, to be honest, of mindfulness content that comes out for children. And you just gotta find a way to just put sugar on the grits, I guess. I don't know. Like you gotta, it's good for you, but you gotta sweeten it up. So content creators and producers, it's still our job to educate kids. It's still our job to teach them. It's still, and help them develop emotionally. But we have to just create stuff that they want to listen to at the same time too. We can't just create the vegetables by itself and it not be enjoyable to eat. So the study just kind of proved that point and helped us become a better company to create that kind of content.
Well, I was really excited when it was released and encouraged people to look at it, because if we're going to deal with issues around bringing people to content, we need to understand why people come to it. And I think that you've really opened the door to help us understand that aspect of media content, especially from looking at audio content.
Yes.
Because so much, it's not that we live in a transmedia environment that gives you multiple ways of consuming products, and some of it's visual, some of it's animation, some of it's film, but audio is also another key way in which people consume content. And I was so glad that ABF Creative was able to put that out there in relationship to the content that you were creating that was also targeted to different communities. Then we found out that more communities were interested.
Exactly. There's a big thing happening right now, and it's becoming a big issue. And the issue is that algorithms are raising our children, right? And audio only content is a way to escape algorithms for children, because it allows them to sit down and be present and just listen. Whereas the algorithm, if they're scrolling on social media, in 1 minute in social media, a kid can experience heartbreak, laughter, anger, anxiety, stress, happiness in 1 minute. I don't think that human brains were built to consume 10 different emotions in 1 minute. And so these algorithms are like the big companies, they hired the same people from Vegas who built the slot machines to create that same kind of, you know, endorphins and the kind of high that you get from pulling a slot machine and keep you stuck. That same algorithm is built into Twitter, into Facebook, into TikTok, into YouTube, even. Even though YouTube is better than a lot of those other, because YouTube is better. But those things are still built in. And so listening to audio, taking a brain break, audio gives kids a brain break. I don't want to dive into a sea of emotions in a short amount of time. I just want to hear a story. I just want to feel good. I just want to learn something. I just want to relax. I just need to, experience that. And that's the reason why the self-esteem boost happens, because they're allowed to take a break from the algorithm and just hear stories the way they're supposed to be told, hear books the way they're supposed to be told, etc. So that's why it's really so important.
Powerful, powerful. And I'm glad that you shared that, because it's another way of helping us to understand how we can promote health and emotional well-being. And these are special ingredients that are part of what you just described to us as the how.
Right.
And the backdrop for the work that you actually do. And I think it's informative, especially when we're talking about difficult conversations around topics that may be more stressful. You want to be able to narrow the focus so that we're not looking at multiple emotions at the same time, and really frustrating or just really causing more anxiety. So I think what you've actually come up with is something that we should be talking more about. And I'm glad that we have you as part of our advisory group to help us understand this. So what's the response been to your work at ABF Creative, and how are some of the reactions that you're capturing from listeners? Showing you that there's an impact of some side.
We get reminders every day that there's real impact happening with the work that we're doing. We have a partnership with St. Jude now. So we're actually working to get charm words in St. Jude's hospitals. For the kids who are facing terminal illness and going through, emotional turmoil at this time and things like that. So charm words is a way to kind of give them that boost to help them. That's part of the healing process. That's a whole nother podcast, but that's part of the healing process. But yeah, parents, teachers, we get emails from parents and teachers all the time about how they use charm words in their classrooms, how they use charm words at home, on the ride to school, even on the ride to camp. They can't miss an episode. And so it's been impactful. Even African folktales, kids have fallen in love with the storyteller. She's a fictional character named Miss JoJo, but kids love her. In the comment section, if you would go into Apple Podcasts, you will see kids talking to her. Like, hey, Miss JoJo, that, just leaving messages, and they think this is a real person. So the impact has been phenomenal. We've received a lot of awards for the work that we're doing. You mentioned the Webby Award. We've also won several Black Podcast Awards for charm words as well. We've also received Ambi's podcast nominations, multiple, at least twice. And we just won a new award. So Podcast Innovator of the Year from Adweek a couple weeks ago. And so that's just showing the impact that we're having in the marketplace, just continuing to go after our kids' ears. We just launched a new kind of podcast called Mini Pods, which is a short 60-second educational podcast that plays twice a day, replacing the school bell. And so we're in over 120 New York City schools right now, replacing the school bell twice a day. We've had a humongous impact in those schools, and that's all educational content that's playing and replacing the school bell and giving them that brain break that we talked about, as they go through school and everything's happening. Well, just take 60 seconds out either to do some breathing, take 60 seconds out to learn about a Hispanic hero, take 60 seconds to learn a scientific fact, take 60 seconds to learn anything in the world. So we are creating this new way for students to experience podcasts even within the school environment too.
I like this too, because it's almost like as we talk more about story world creation, we can have short form story worlds and we can have longer form story worlds. And
That's
so I like
correct.
how you've sort of brought these different techniques to help center, children in a space that's not just bombarding them with so many things. And I
Yeah.
think you're also helping us to have another way of looking at what is referred to as media literacy. So
Yes.
much of the media literacy work has generally been focused on what we see and hear, meaning
Yes.
the visuals on television, but what about the other spaces and places where people do acquire knowledge and information? And so ABF Creative is playing a huge role that I'm glad is being recognized.
Thank you.
Because this in the general media world, we don't have chance to have these kinds of conversations. So in terms of your work and your engagement in the communities that you work in, what have been some of the most common challenges you've seen Black children and families confront when it comes to topics like climate change? I mean, where do we hear about those things? Where are those short form story worlds, or are there any? So tell us a little bit about what you've been
I
seeing.
think there have been some I think there's been attempts. I don't know about many, but I'm assuming there's been some attempts. I think the biggest thing is just having children understand that this affects them too. Right now, a lot of kids, especially Black and brown kids who live in urban environments, when they hear about climate change, they see green trees, they see oceans, they see rivers, they see icebergs, they see nature, they see. So when you hear about that and that's the only thing you see, well, you say that, well, that don't got nothing to do with me, because I don't live in the forest. I don't live. I don't live on the icebergs. I don't live near rivers. I don't. That's not my. I live in buildings. I live in apartment buildings.
Mhm.
I live in a city, where there's a bunch of cars on the street and there's concrete and there's litter in some places. In some places, there's just it's just a different environment. So I think that we're missing the mark visually, and when we speak about it, we're missing the mark, you know, literally, and so I think it's just it's one of those things where, we're not connecting to Black and brown kids, because we're not giving them experiences and giving them stories and giving them education that shows them at the center of it. And shows they're the people that look like them and the people that sound like them doing the talking. And I think that's the biggest thing I've been able to discover, since diving deep into this topic. Thanks to you. You're the one who kind of brought this to my attention and brought this to my office and started my journey, and just discovering climate change and the media that's supposed to teach us about it.
Well, I appreciate that acknowledgement, and I also have to say that because of the conversations that we've had, it's helped me to understand how we apply and use the knowledge, the skills, and the background techniques that you bring more effectively in this work. And that's what we're trying to do when we bring a cross section of people together to have these conversations, whether they're behavioral and mental health specialists or climate scientists or people who are working in informal learning spaces like museums and libraries.
Right.
They need to be able to understand that in some instances they have access to resources that they may not be using as effectively as they could because we've not spent a lot of time thinking about it from the standpoint of what people hear and how people hear. Because when you keep mentioning this, I know a lot of the work that I've done in the children's media space, when you're trying to come up with casting. It's interesting to me that sometimes we cast according to how people look and maybe an accent they have, but not necessarily how they sound. And I
Exactly.
know I grew up in an era when we studied something called Ebonics, which was another way of classifying a sort of dialect that exists in many communities. So bringing that into the conversation is important with other dialects, even, is important to think about.
It's a huge thing. Even if they're not speaking Ebonics, you just know when you hear someone's voice, there's a certain tones you only hear from a Black mom or a Black dad or a Black person. Even if they're not speaking in a way that, even if they're not speaking in like they've grown up in Newark, New Jersey, there's still a certain tone. There's still a certain kind of way that they speak that you just immediately know, oh, that's probably a Black guy speaking. Now, don't get me wrong. There are, sometimes you can't put there's some people who might sound quote unquote Black or sound quote unquote white. So I won't play that game, but I will say that children do hear and they know someone who sounds like their mom. They know someone who sounds like their aunt. They know someone who sounds like their uncle. They know someone who sounds like their grandma. And so, yes, even when we're creating audio, we have to be very mindful of not just, people just creating and casting voices that sound like people that they are growing up around too. That's just really important. It's diversity in voices is just the same as diversity in visuals.
Glad you made that point. Big point to be made. And I think that we have to take that with us as we think about this whole project, looking at representing different voices.
Yes.
Not only what the context is for the environment in which we're working in, but how does it get communicated, and how do those sounds actually get built into how we do producing. So if others were to create podcasts or audiobooks that dealt with climate change, for example, how would they need to be designed to ensure that they were having a positive impact on kids? Because you use some techniques in your different podcast productions that I think are really important.
Oh, I think the number one thing is going to the audience that you're trying to attract. It doesn't cost a lot to find a small tape together focus group. You can ask a few friends like, hey, can I ask a few questions, or, seek out a few parents and, maybe ask, can you speak to their kids with them present, of course. Just gathering as much data as possible to make that decision. There's some other ways you can do it too. Obviously, you can do an online survey like we did. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to publicly release the results, but you can also do an online survey. There's sites like, I believe, PickFu, where you can do, I think it's PickFu. I haven't used it in a while, but there's sites where you can do surveys and get people, and they'll go out and get the respondents for you. Sometimes you don't even have to look for the respondents. I mean, you have to pay for it, of course, but there are so many different ways to collect data today. So to me, that's the basis of what I would do, is make sure I go to the community and then read as much research that I didn't do as possible. Find independent research that could be online that kind of supports some of the things that you're trying to do. Quick Google search, YouTube, seek it out. And once you've gained a lot of that perspective, put together a creative brief on exactly what you are looking to do, like what kind of podcast you're looking to make. Be conscious in how you cast. Like we just talked about a minute ago. As you're putting together these stories, as you're putting together voices, as you're putting together the structure and the format, just keep all of the data points that you've gathered in that first step in mind to inform all the decisions, the format. Like, so I'll give an example, Charm Words. It's a 3-minute podcast. We did a lot of research to figure, and we looked at other people's research and found that kids' attention spans are very short. So if we want to help them, listen to us a lot more, maybe we need to make shorter podcasts. We also saw that routines are the best way to get people to come back every day. The same way you come back and brush your teeth. It's a habit. It's a routine. It helps you. So we need to make audio content that's sort of like brushing your teeth in the same way. So we kind of combine that short form with something that is routine. And that's kind of how Charmworks was born. So that was informed by those decisions. And then it worked out. There was one of the many cases. Now, it don't always work out, but this is one of the cases where it actually, an experiment worked out. We created something that's like a mental dental floss. And we combine that. So using data. So just using data and research to inform your decisions in the development process is always something that I would encourage people to do.
With my background in child development and early learning, I've always appreciated the ways in which you talk about making a kid appropriate content, yes, that pays attention to who they are. And first way you can find that out is by actually talking to the children that you're going to be working with, to see how they perceive what you're talking about. Yeah. And I think, the other thing I wanted to say too is that when you were talking about Charm Words and you were talking about how you created this, you also have an approach to helping children to feel empowered or to have a sense of joy. So how do you help build that into feeling optimistic about contributing to climate solutions or building a more livable world, with their families and communities? What's top of mind for you there in terms of infusing that kind of messaging into audio content?
Yeah, I think that's always a challenge. I'm not that to me is that's the challenge that we're trying to achieve now. We're in the middle of, and I know you might bring it up, but we're in the middle of developing a climate, a climate change podcast right now, and the goal is I'm leaning on research. I'm leaning back on research again. I remember reading a research that Nickelodeon had released on kids. It wasn't on podcasts, but it was on kids content. And they said that there are different kinds of characters that kids relate to. You're either a mirror or you're either a guide. And so that's my approach with this climate change topic, because it's so centered on a topic that's unfun, that could be deemed unfun for kids. I think I need to have a mixture of both. I need mirrors and guides all in the podcast. So we're going to make a fictional podcast. It's called What Happened to the Fireflies. And it's about this brother and sister duo that's from a city like Newark, New Jersey, and they love to investigate stuff. They have a favorite TV show that they watch. They love to stream and binge watch. It's a detective show. They learn about how fireflies are going missing year by year, and the population is going down. And then there's some sketchy stuff happening in the neighborhood as well. And they're trying to figure out, is the disappearance of the fireflies connected to the sketchy things that's happening in their neighborhood? So it gives them that mystery solving aspect that glues kids to these shows that they love. But when they look at the two main characters, Misty and Kamari, they're gonna be like, oh, they're just like me. Kamari likes to play basketball. He's very upset that the summer program got canceled because the heat is keeping kids from being outside. Well, where's that heat? Why is it so hot outside? Why is it so hot in the summer? Why is it particularly more hot in Newark than it is in Montclair? And then you have his sister, who's kind of like this researcher, and she's like, I'm gonna figure it out. And she's learning words she never heard about before, but she's introducing the words into the podcast from a mirror point of view. Like, she's saying it wrong, she's pronouncing it wrong, but then someone's correcting her. And then now she's like learning and kind of almost like putting her, like the listener's gonna feel like they are her. I'm learning about this word. What, how does a firefly even light up? Like, it's a bioluminescent, like, what is that? So just creating those mirrors. But then you have guides like the science teacher who starts a club at the library during the summer, and when the kids need answers, they go to him. And you have guides like their father, who's a working father who's working 2 jobs, and then when they sit down for dinner, and he's asking them about their day, and he's giving them a guidance and telling them not to go get themselves into trouble and all these. So just a series of mirrors and guides that look like the world they come from. And it's not your typical climate change podcast, because when the kids listen to it, they're gonna be more intrigued by the mystery and solving the crime and all. But subtly, they're learning about heat zones and the weather and all these different things, all these different climate, habitat degradation and all these different things that they learn about, all of that, all within wrapped in this whole mystery. So that's our goal with What Happened to the Fireflies, which is the name of the podcast.
Well, I am so glad that you were able to share that with us. And also it helps me to I'll ask the question, how can we incorporate STEM learning into content? And does that include like authors and illustrators and other kids media creators learning from climate scientists or behavioral and mental health specialists? How does that work?
I think so. You have to know the science, learn about the science as much as possible, and then figure out how do you put sugar on it. Just like, how do you make it make sense for this world? And so that's and as we're building this, we're not building it on the island. We're going to take the script back and work with scientists from the Aspen Institute who can validate some of the things that we're doing. So yeah, I think it's, you don't ever want to do it on your own. You want to make sure that the what you're teaching and what you're putting out in the world is accurate and factual. But I think the goal of storytellers and content creators is, we're already creative. We already know how to tell stories. We already know how to create interesting plot lines and things like that. Now our goal is just like to dress up the science in those same techniques that we know how to do. It's just marrying the two. And that's sort of what that was my goal, was to marry the two, but not be cheesy about it. I think, that's the one thing that the kids are, from our conversation with kids, they just don't, they don't want to hear about, this being green and planting the garden and different things like that. Not in that way. Not the young children do. The young children love it. The younger children love it. But once you start to hit 14, 15, 15, 11, 12, 13, they start to be like, nah, I don't want to hear that stuff. And so, but we're talking about that. What happened to the Fireflies isn't moving away from that. We're still talking about that. We're just dressing it up in a detective mystery. We're just dressing it up with characters who sound like them and think it's uncool at first. But then they're going to start to transform like the characters are transforming. And that's our goal, to guide them through that transformation.
And I know that you've been a part of an incredible group of people identified as creating wonderful content. You were part of Aspen Ideas, which was Planet Media Pitch Fest.
Yes.
What was that experience like in terms of bringing what you're doing to that particular stage?
I was nervous. You know, we submitted what happened to the Fireflies to and honestly, Ed, there is no what happened to the Fireflies without you. If you didn't come and bring this to me, I would have never thought of this idea. And so I only entered the contest because you brought this topic to me. And so after you brought this topic to me, I said, "Oh, I'm going to enter that contest. I think I got an idea." And that's when the Fireflies idea was entered in there, and I became a finalist. So they flew us out to Miami, and I got a chance to pitch the idea in front of Bill Nye and Niles Rogers and several Aspen Institute executives, and we ended up landing financing for the pilot from that experience. And so it was nerve-wracking because here I am with this idea in front of a whole bunch of room of scientists and pitching it. And here I am, this kid from Newark, only heard about climate change because Ed Greene brought it to me. And I felt like an imposter. But you know, I've learned something a long time ago, that if you're not scared, then the opportunity isn't big enough. So to me, I just said, okay, the opportunity's big. Let's go. So I learned a lot from that.
Well, I appreciate the acknowledgement, but I also want to throw back to you the fact that you're grounded and you're well infused in what it is that it takes to make content. And you represent to me what I call the roots of representation. You ground us. And so before we let you go, we wanted to ask about any other individuals or groups or resources that we should be aware of, either that you collaborate with or that you're anticipating working with, that contribute to the work going forward that we're trying to do with Black Rep for Kids, or that you're doing with your work.
Yeah, I think the Aspen Institute has been particularly very helpful, especially this Planet Ed. I would say kind of a division that exists within the Aspen Institute. I think there should be more collaboration. I think reaching out to them for support and help on the work that you're doing within this field could be very helpful. I think even looking locally, a lot of organizations locally are missing the mark, and that's the reason why Black, Rep for Kids exists. But you can still, as a storyteller, as a content creator, find those groups. I'm pretty sure some exist locally, and you can figure out how to help them get their message out there a little bit more, make it more palatable for the community, because it's a state of emergency, and the only way we're gonna get through it is if content creators, start to collaborate more with the sustainability and climate change groups that'll exist locally in their own environment, own ecosystem. So get connected with them, see ways that you can help, volunteer your creative services, or even if it's just giving advice. It doesn't mean you have to roll your sleeves up in that sense, but it can be, hey, let's meet for an hour each month and allow me to give you advice on how you can tell your message a little bit better for kids or for communities of color, and get it out there. I think that's going to be the small changes that you can make after listening to this podcast.
I love it. Well, Anthony, you've provided us with some essential information and perspectives to think about as we build this STEM-related knowledge into our children's climate change literature, into how we look at using audio, and as well as how we build that into hands-on experiences. So I want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today and for your incredible contributions to our Black Rep for Kids initiative. You've been there for us, and we look forward to continuing this conversation with you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being on here, and I know so many people are going to learn a lot of great nuggets from this podcast. Not this episode in particular, but all the other episodes. I got a chance to edit and listen and be behind the scenes, and you walk away smarter for sure.
Well, and we're walking away much smarter and feeling much more confident in how we can do our work because of you. So thanks again. And to our listening audience, thank you for being with us today as we explore more about roots of representation. Thanks for listening to Roots of Representation. If you'd like to comment on this episode, please head over to blackrepforkids.knowledge.org. Our website also contains free resources and more information about the project, which is led by Knology in collaboration with the Highlights Foundation, the National Black Child Development Institute, the Association of Children's Museums, and a panel of nationally recognized advisors. Remember, Black Rep for Kids isn't just a podcast. It's an essential part of the project's culminating experience, which will be a 2-day unconference event held in fall 2024. Head over to the website to register now. And in the meantime, let's keep the conversation going. You can also share your ideas and resources for amplifying Black voices and stories in children's STEM literature at blackrepforkids.knowledge.org. Roots of Representation is produced by ABF Creative, an award-winning podcast network that creates cultural and emotional connections through podcasts. The series is funded by the National Science Foundation's Advancing Informal STEM Learning Program under grant number 2314101. Any opinions, findings, and conclusions or recommendations expressed in this podcast series are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of the National Science Foundation. Roots of Representation, the podcast centering Black climate story worlds for young minds.